This is the Startup Still Say podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube or LinkedIn, and be sure to give us your feedback. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Startup Still Say. I'm Riddhi Gore, your co-host, and here with Anthony Prakash and some very amazing guests from Safi. We have Miraal, Martin, and Daria today. So welcome all of you, and then let's dive into it with a quick intro.
Hello everyone, my name is Miraal, one of the co-founders of Safi and the CEO.
My name is Martin. I'm also one of the co-founders of Safi and currently acting as the CTO.
Hello everyone, my name's Daria and I'm the COO of Safi. I'm also a co-founder.
All right. Impressive, you all. Let's just start with how did this all come about? You're also young, so very excited to hear this origin story.
Oh, it started a while ago. Almost our 3-year anniversary is coming up, which feels so crazy to us. But the three of us were in university. We were doing a similar program. So I was studying computer science and business at the University of Waterloo. And Martin and Daria were studying math and business. And through our program, we were doing a lot of case competitions. You have the HP, Google, IKEA, they come and they ask you to solve a problem for them. And as a group, we were doing pretty well. We saw we had good team synergy. We liked kind of coming up with cool ideas. And during COVID, we came across a more interesting competition that was being hosted by the UN. They asked us to find a problem that was happening in the world because of climate change and find a solution to it. And so that was a really interesting prompt. I'll let Martin and Daria talk more about the problem space that we stumbled upon there.
Yeah, so COVID really kind of fell upon, and almost, it sounds wrong to say, but it fell, for us at least, when it came to creating Safi, almost at the right time, because we had a lot of time at home and we were just trying to keep busy. And the case competition, well, honestly, Mimi, I think you're probably the best one to say where the problem came from, because you're the closest one to it, at least at the time.
Sorry, I just feel like I've been speaking too much today.
It's okay.
We've realized that unsafe milk is spreading because of climate change, which seems like such a weird relation. But essentially, a lot of dairy farmers, they can't really use cows as their primary cattle anymore. They need to move to camels because camels survive droughts better. And as we know, droughts are happening more often because of climate change. Unfortunately, camels just carry more diseases, and especially coronaviruses in them inherently. So we were in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic, and we had heard about MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is a coronavirus 10 times deadlier than COVID and spreading through raw milk. Daria mentioned my backstory because I grew up in Oman, in the Middle East, where we had an outbreak of MERS when I was growing up. And so to see that a coronavirus like that could also become a global pandemic from people drinking raw milk really resonated with us and became a problem we wanted to solve.
Yeah, so sorry. I think the crux of the problem is figuring out like why there isn't enough controls over the milk that's being sold within these rural areas. And so really like if we want to understand how to mitigate the amount of disease, the number one step is figuring out what is the tooling that the individual rural farmers need, and then how can we actually track that on an aggregate level. And so we looked at why they weren't participating in these like big formal systems, because we know that there's like very, very big formal supply chains where a farmer will give milk to a collector or an aggregator. They'll pasteurize the milk and then sell it to a retailer, and that'll ultimately go to the customer. But in East Africa, that's only about 10 to 20% of the market. The rest of it is like 80, 90%. So why aren't farmers selling to this formal market? And we kind of got down to the core reason of they're just not getting enough value. So to them, it's just so much more affordable, and they make so much more income by just selling direct to the customer rather than participating in the formal supply chain. But then the flip side is this creates a bunch of disease and untrackable liters of milk that are causing these potential outbreaks. And kind of the culmination of this is, can we take this formal supply chain, miniaturize it, and democratize it across all of these farmers? And so that's kind of how we came up with the device. And I'll let Daria and me speak to kind of what it actually does.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Daria. Before we go into the device itself or the solution, I mean, just to expand on the fact that, you're still in college, and the belief that you guys can actually go after a problem like this, I think is even bigger than actually coming up with a solution, right? Because a lot of founders don't get past that point, right? So given the amazing work you've done, now it's all hindsight. What gave you guys the belief, number one, saying, hey, obviously Mimi's been through it. She's been close to that problem in her childhood. But for you guys to come together and say, okay, this is worthwhile pursuing, and we can come up with a solution. At that point, you didn't even know what the solution was, right? I mean, how did the three of you team up, number one, right? I mean, and how did you say, okay, I mean, this is a path we should take to get to where you are right now?
We actually started off as six, and I think we were just the three most delusional ones in the beginning. Um, but like the first year, we were just kind of like we had these huge plans, and sometimes we look back on like where we wanted to be in like 2023 and 2024, and it's like we really were delusional. Like we were like we're gonna have 1 million devices sold and shipped by like 2025. But yeah, like the first year, we were just kind of spinning in circles. We wanted to make the change, and we were kind of getting to grips with how we were going to do that. But at least for me, the biggest part or step within this whole flow was actually going down to Rwanda and running a pilot. The device that we had brought was complete garbage at the time. Like it was just 3D printed, thrown together with some
Come on.
wires. I would say like I would not be proud of that right now at this point. But like just taking that leap of faith, believing in ourselves and believing in kind of not necessarily the product that we had at the time, but the mission of what we were actually trying to accomplish. And then going and actually getting good feedback, like I think that's what gave me a ton of confidence coming back.
Just to sort of take it a step back from even going to Africa, I think initially what really pushed us was the support that we almost got. So from the competition, I guess a key part to that is yes, we participated, but we ended up winning out of I think 1,000 teams across the world, which was very. I mean, we all won competitions here and there at case comps, but that was really like wow. There's a lot of people from the House of Commons, I think it's called, very high level people that believe in this, and well, not necessarily in us, but that they think this is a great solution. Okay, maybe let's roll with it. And honestly, to credit University of Waterloo where it deserves credit, there was a lot of programs and ecosystems that we could reach out to. For those that are familiar, like Concept, Velocity, that sort of took us in, listened, we were able to pitch more and raise more money. So I think there was a lot of support that even went beyond us that, at least for me, gave me a lot of confidence because really I knew nothing about Africa, about milk and pasteurization, but just the fact that people believed in us and in our enthusiasm was absolutely kind of really what set the foundation that this could be something. Yeah, that was my bit.
That was exactly what I was going to say. So Daria just said it for me.
So I do like I think there's like a fad or maybe I'm totally wrong, but being lactose intolerant seems to be a thing. So I was like, do you guys even drink milk? Was that one of the things like, hey, we're gonna go after a product we consume every day, so we're gonna go fix this? Or it was just like, hey, we see a problem, this was a UN topic. So
We've done a lot of Q&As and a lot nobody has ever asked us that question.
That's
um
very unique. Yeah.
yeah, I personally at that time I didn't really drink cow's milk, but funny enough, whenever I would go back home to Romania or whenever I just wasn't in Canada, I would drink cow's milk, but for whatever reason at home and at university, I was very much off of oat milk and almond milk, just supplements for whatever reason. But I think it was
Yeah.
the problem that felt more compelling than our usage of milk.
It's funny. I actually became lactose intolerant like a year after starting Safi, so very random, but yeah.
I don't know. I love milk. I love to drink milk. Yeah. I guess it's just one of those things you take for granted, though. Like, the
Yeah.
fact that you can just go to the store and go and purchase it and you don't have to worry about any safety concerns, the quality of the milk, how much nutrients you're getting. Like, everything is controlled step by step. When you go to East Africa and you look at this like market that's like 80% and it's all informal, it's completely different. And it's like a brand new world that we really have to learn a lot about.
no, that's
Martin,
fantastic.
let's double click on East Africa that you said, right? You said going there was really the spark you needed and figuring out the problem on the ground, if you will. So, I mean, here you are, three of you or six of you at that point, starting this journey. And so, what support system did you guys have to say, okay, we're trying to solve for this? I mean, the competition you win help you get started with a trip to Africa to talk to the right people, go connect with all of them, and I mean, uh, and then from there on, I mean, what did you narrow down the problem to? I mean, of course, you mentioned pasteurization being one of the primary ways to get over this. But I mean, what sort of steps did you guys follow to get to the root of the problem, if you will?
I guess I could start at the beginning of that, and then I'll let Mimi and Martin dissect the rest of it. But initially, the UN competition was really what sparked the idea. And then we sort of went to the university, we tried to get more funding, and we won a couple of competitions, but it wasn't monetarily really enough to get there. And what really propelled us was an incubator in Vienna, randomly and funnily enough. And their whole initiative was in supporting non-African based companies, or I think I might be wrong. There was some African based ones, but just in kind of helping them either develop their already existing African market or bringing them to the African market. So we got to pick between Rwanda, Uganda, and Ghana. No, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Ghana. And we just ended up being in Rwanda because as we happened to learn there, Rwandans love milk. I mean, they have milk bars like we have alcohol bars. So that was just with their help that we got there, financially speaking.
Okay, so you go there. I mean, you mentioned the 80-20 ratios and all of that, right? I mean, so is it because mainly of due to cost reasons they are unable to do the pasteurization, or were there other factors because of which, I mean, the milk is left unattended or drunk
Yeah,
raw, if you will?
I think probably two. Number one is cost, or not cost, but the amount of income that they make per liter of milk. So if you sell to a aggregator collector, like in the region, they're going to give you less milk than if you sell directly to the customer. And
Less
it's just
money.
a
Okay.
factor of, yeah, sorry, less money. And it's just a factor of like how close they are to the end of the supply chain. So when they sell to the formal market, they're like the first in the supply chain, but they're like 6 steps removed from the final customer. And so the amount of value that the actual aggregator can give them is quite low versus like if they're selling direct to the customer, it's a lot more and they have control over their own pricing. Number two is probably infrastructure. So there's just generally not a big distribution infrastructure in these areas. Like the roads themselves aren't very well maintained. There's not a lot of chilling or cooling, which is a huge, huge factor in pasteurization and dairy processing. So without that infrastructure, it's hard to like centralize a rural farmer that's like, let's say 30
Mhm.
kilometers from the nearest aggregation center. So I think those are probably the two biggest factors. Maybe some misplanning on the government's part in the beginning, where they just kind of mandated the pasteurization of milk and the sale of pasteurization of milk, and didn't put the right controls in place to ensure that that was going to go through the formal market.
There's also, I would say, a good bit of, I wouldn't say misinformation, but maybe miseducation in terms of the consumption of raw milk, pasteurized milk, and boiled milk. So traditionally, we've come to learn in Rwandan culture, I think it's the same thing for Kenya, they boil milk 3 times over to make sure that it's safe. So they know that raw milk isn't necessarily safe to drink, but they resort to boiling traditionally to get the bad bacteria, the viruses, anything that could be harmful out. But that actually, in terms, harms the milk and leads to malnutrition because you're not only boiling out bacteria, you're boiling out vitamins and proteins and really all the stuff that makes milk nutritious. So that's another factor where we do help and making sure that milk is monitored and it's not only safe but it's also nutritious compared to what they had been using.
I actually want to hear more about the pilot, right? Because I was going through your site and there's a photograph where either one of you is explaining it and there's just faces of skeptic people and the next one where they're smiling, right? So I'm assuming going in because traditionally they know how to handle milk, it's an age-old thing, we've been doing it, why are you all coming in? How was that journey, right? How was that explanation and kind of getting through that hurdle?
So I guess it like just preempted a little bit with the device we ended up coming up with to solve this entire problem is a pasteurization control unit. So it's essentially a device that you put onto your pot of milk. It measures time and temperature of pasteurization, and essentially tells you when your milk is safe to consume, health wise, and then also when it has still the right amount of nutrients before you've boiled them off. And so, of course, when you go to these new villages, especially when you're telling them, hey, you've been boiling your milk for generations, but did you know that kills nutrients? Obviously, they're going to look at you kind of offended, skeptical. Who are you to tell me? We're also very young. Like, we're all younger than 25. We're all 24 years old. And so it's also just like, who are these kids and like, why are they here? And I think we've really tackled that just by being honest, relatable, bringing personal experiences into the story of, hey, like, our family, like my family is Pakistani, they used to boil their milk. My mom grew up boiling her milk, so she was as shocked as you might be. Like we're all learning and just showing like our own research to help back it up. Again, when you're speaking to them, there's always that little bit of like confusion. But as soon as you start doing the demonstration, so I guess the pictures you saw on the website, at first everyone's a little bit skeptical, but as soon as you start demonstrating the use of the device, we have test strips, they taste the milk before and after.
Mhm.
That's when they really believe it. So it's genuinely like see it to believe it, we learned. Until you're speaking, you have your PowerPoint, your research paper behind you. Everyone's kind of looking at you like, when can I leave?
Yeah.
And as you start demonstrating it, everyone gets really excited. So
Get the
that's
oohs and the ahs.
And I think like shouldn't downplay also the impact that like the community leaders have there. So the first
Yeah.
thing, and we got super lucky because we would go to like an NGO or like a big kind of community leading group, and they would help us embed ourselves within the community and meet the right people. But yeah, it would literally be like we're speaking. It's like a 20-minute presentation. Everybody's like kind of blank faces and like not really smiling. And then the community leader starts talking and everyone starts clapping and like looking at us
Mhm.
and smiling. So yeah, I think like that's probably one of the biggest things is we have like very, very solid connections with the community leaders. And the first thing to do is explain the product to them, get them to become the champions of the product. And then it's very, very easy to go to the rest of the farmers and do these kind of like community group sessions.
So with the device itself, right? I mean, people talk about reinventing the wheel before you try to come up with something. I mean, were you worried about the fact that, hey, we're creating something brand new? Of course, it works right now after the fact. I mean, how much of research did you do to see if there might be something that already kind of existed? You could have used components of that into what you were building out of what it eventually became. And at what point did you realize, oh man, I mean, something like this doesn't exist. We have to do it for this price point to work. And Martin, you were laughing earlier as to how it was 3D printed in the first stages and whatnot. That's how these things start, right? To where it is right now. So again, I mean, to put it in short, right? I mean, instead of recreating the whole wheel, if you will, when you how did you come to the realization that this actually requires invention from the ground up to the device and its in form and scale that you came up with?
I mean, thankfully, pasteurization as a word and as a concept has existed for, I think, about 100 years now, and it's very well researched and very well studied. So we didn't have to go and reinvent the wheel. We just sort of had to perfect it for the new landscape. And
Mhm.
pasteurizers exist, and they're huge. And you can even, there's some government fundings that allow certain farmers, kiosk, like milk reseller owners, to have their own pasteurizers, and they're gigantic, and they're just unused. So through research, we realized that really boils down to the fact that they don't have electrical infrastructure to support the machines that exist. So we knew we had to make it off the grid. And you're not really going to make something off the grid without batteries, solar panels, and that just by nature meant that it had to be boiled down again to something smaller. And when you're looking at the more rural farmers, they don't even reach the capacities of these large scale industrial gigantic milk pasteurizers. So just the baby steps kind of led to the 3D printed MVP that Martin was talking about.
Got it. So tell us more about the device itself, right? Or, I mean, where it started and where it is right now, or what are the steps the farmers need to take, how long it takes for them to actually make the milk safe. I mean, just tell us about the product itself.
For sure. Yeah. So the product's gone through a bunch of increments, but fundamentally, there's like three components. Number one is while the farmer is heating the milk, we want to make sure that the milk is in constant movement. Otherwise, it starts burning at the bottom and the heat distribution isn't uniform. So the bottom of the device has a whisk that's automated. Number two is a temperature probe that essentially measures the temperature of the milk throughout the whole pot. And you want that temperature to reach 72 degrees for 15 seconds. That's like the gold standard of pasteurization for high temperature, short time pasteurization. So we built that into the device itself and it tracks for that. And then has this like very, very nice UI component on the top that essentially just shows the farmer, like literally with lights, when the pasteurization is complete, whether the device has enough battery, and so just kind of takes them through the whole system. And then the third part to this whole device is this data tracking component. And so we didn't realize this early on. It was kind of like something that we got to through multiple increments after, I think, coming back from our first pilot. Some of our partners had asked us, it's nice that the farmers are pasteurizing, but if I'm like a big NGO or a big regulator or aggregator, I want to know exactly when the farmer pasteurized, how much they pasteurized. Like I need this data, or else I can't actually validate that the milk is good quality and that the customers are purchasing good quality milk. And so we realized like we already have kind of the internal infrastructure necessary to build some type of IoT device. So we kind of pivoted a little bit and had some network connectivity that we built into the device that allows it to be pinged pretty much from the cloud anywhere. And we can extract this data, pull it into like a central repository where any regulator or NGO can access it. And so kind of in doing so, we've created this very, very nice centralized system that, first of all, it gives the tooling to farmers, but also allows governments and regulators to have full transparency into the dairy supply chain.
Got it.
I'm like Anthony, just like looking at our childhoods, there would be a milkman that would come to the door, and you would just know that, hey, this is the good one. But I believe this device is what you're doing, like a Yelp review, right? Hey, this has consistently performed, and it's a huge data point for the local farmers to build from. Oh, okay. And you said first pilot. Was there a second one too?
It's been a couple.
So we've been to Rwanda and Kenya, I think 5 times over the past 2 years. And so every time you're like learning more. I think the last time we went in August and November, and we finally have a product that we think is final now. We've incorporated so much feedback from the farmers and the milk vendors and the government officials to come to this final prototype. But we really wanted to co-create the product with the people who are going to end up using it. And so initially when we went to Rwanda, we took 2 options, a solar powered version that didn't pasteurize, like didn't heat the milk, sorry, and one version that uses electricity but heated. And we asked them like, which one do you prefer? What features do you want? And we always knew we weren't building for ourselves. We were building for this very specific demographic. And so all of these different pilots, I think we did 4 in total, ensured that we were creating the
Perfecting.
product. Exactly.
So maybe you obviously started this off like a competition, but you wanted to do something fun. I mean, it turned out to be something super worthwhile and saving the world almost, right? So, what's the vision for the future with Safi? I mean, you guys that are, I mean, you did mention prototype a few times. Obviously, it's taken a few times to get to where you are. But I can also imagine that East Africa is just a sliver of where this problem is, right? So maybe touch upon what vision you guys have in the future for Safi. And I know, Martin, you mentioned partners a couple of times. I'm assuming you will need your partner network to help you get to those different parts of the world as well. Maybe speak about that as well.
Absolutely. So we always say East Africa is just our beachhead market. Because the market's quite small, it allows us to really perfect the dairy supply chain and learn before going into much larger markets. We have our eyes on India. That's the number one market we want to go after, Rwanda and Kenya. You guys just have such a huge dairy supply chain and a very good supply chain as well. The Rwandans actually mimic their dairy supply chain over, like they saw what India was doing and tried to emulate that. And so because we're kind of familiar with that supply chain right now, we're really excited to start working in India as well. I mean, Martin and I were Googling like countries we want to live in. Apparently they have a good dairy supply chain in Bali, so we might end up there. But no, all jokes aside, I think Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, those are probably the countries we'll be targeting next.
South
Okay.
America is pretty big too. In terms of also, I forgot the name of it, but it's like, I don't want to say baby milk banks, but it's for mothers that can't necessarily, they can't produce enough milk or their milk quality isn't to scale. That there's also a venture there into going into human milk. And I guess it's worthwhile noting, I don't even know if we said it, but it's not, we started with camels, we pivoted to cows because that's just kind of where the bulk of the market is. And funny enough, we're going back to a camel pilot now, but really it works on any type of milk. We can do goat milk, maybe we can look into cheese making, just explore different niches within what we've already been doing as well.
This is exciting stuff. I'm like, I looked at a cup of milk and I never had these many questions, and I'm glad that you all took a look at it because it's a nutrition source for a lot of areas, right? So there's no undermining the scale of this. So, yep.
Yeah, it's oftentimes like the cheapest and most nutritious product that children can drink. Like there's a ton of school feeding programs in Rwanda and Kenya that we're looking at. And yeah, it just goes to show like, milk is such an important pivotal factor within a child's development. And if they can't secure the quality of that, then like there's a huge gap there. So absolutely.
Was there a how did the name Safi come through? Like where did that come from?
I'm not sure how it is in Hindi, but in Swahili, which is where we're working, it means clean. Urdu as well, Hindi, Arabic also. So it's just a really good universal word for safe, pure, clean milk.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's
Radhi and I were talking before we started recording. We were like, that's our best guess, right? So we were right on.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of scale, right? Obviously, where you are, I'm assuming you're sitting in your parents' room or your dorm room and doing 3D printing of all your equipment right now. But I mean, in terms of mass production to your vision of where you need to go, have you drawn up plans to partner with somebody to manufacture this at scale? And I mean, obviously, in a global market, I mean, you can look at so many different ways to, minimize that supply chain and get it faster to the markets you want. I mean, what sort of thought process have you put into that?
Yeah, this is definitely top of mind now. We're going from like creating 50 to 100 devices at a time to starting to think about like larger 1,000 to 10,000. And when you get to that type of scale, we're thinking almost to start creating some partners in China. Ultimately, we want to do manufacturing locally. I think that's always been the goal. Involve local labor and be very, very close to the communities. It's like a thing where we're going to simplify logistics, but we also want to have proximity within these regions. And so yeah, it's definitely like a lot of logistical planning. There's some interesting stuff to be said about like taxation as you bring product in from China into Kenya versus Rwanda, and so we're trying to figure out the right mix of all of that. But yeah, we're planning to do a much bigger production run, hopefully this summer. And so definitely top of mind, doing a ton of shopping for manufacturers and just standardizing everything.
Yeah, with the current political climate, be careful with tariffs as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
so I want to pivot to just your journey as co-founders, right? I mean, I'm not even sure if you guys have had a chance to see yourself in that light, given that you have so much to deal with, just with school and jobs and doing this. But as co-founders, right? Obviously, you're all working together. But I mean, things are not always rosy, right? You guys tend to disagree at times. You guys tend to walk away from conversations. And how has that journey been? Just being, three co-founders, and how do you make decisions, key decisions amongst yourselves, and just maybe give us a couple of stories of what you've learned about yourselves as co-founders through this journey. I'm always fascinated to learn from that.
I think,
Stuff.
thankfully, it's good that there's three. Thinking back to six, it would have been a little bit crazy to make decision making, but because there's three, there's always either two that can agree on one thing, and then you kind of could accept that you're wrong, speaking from experience. And yeah, I think three is a really good number. I think it would have been very hard to do it in twos because then you would just have two very opposing opinions. But something that I think I've learned from myself, and maybe I guess I carry it in other venues. I'm very skeptical. And I think I'm always the first one to say, this isn't going to work, guys. Or I don't think we've properly looked at this. Or no. I'm always first to say no. Not for
Daria
any good
loves to
reason,
play
honestly.
devil's advocate. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's sometimes not very fun to have those conversations. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely difficult to make decisions democratically for sure. But ultimately, I think the quality of our decision making is a lot better that way. It's like what Daria said. Like you have at least three sources of checks before you go into a certain direction, and all of us bring, I think, like a very very unique perspective. And even if it ends up in like a conflict, it's usually for the best. Usually, but yeah, like I can't even imagine doing this type of startup with just like one person, like by yourself.
Mhm.
I think like the implicit motivation that you get from the co-founders around you is like very, very underrated. Like for me, that's one of the biggest things, just to kind of keep chugging along. Like even when things aren't necessarily moving fast and you're getting like a ton of funding and like things are, deals are progressing. I think just having like a really, really solid group of people around you who you're working with, um, yeah, that's definitely one of the bigger parts for me.
I think the only thing
What's
I'll add to that is that we're all very like strong, opinionated people. But I think what we do a good job is we'll probably bring in our personal opinions, argue a little, but we always do put the company first and like what's best for the company. Okay, this might be my personal opinion, but what's actually going to help us move forward? And we're able to like always. I think we always kind of align at the end of the day. I don't think we've ever made a decision where one person wasn't on board and had to go with it because I have to go with it. We kind of end up making the decisions together, and that's kind of the beauty of it.
I think to also shout Philip out, our engineer, I think a lot of Savi has been built. So Mimi mentioned at the beginning, she's computer science, me and Martin are in math. Other than a little bit of the technicality from computer science and maybe the algorithm that goes into it for math, there's almost none of that. So there's been a lot of external people that know milk, people that know microbiology, people that know science, and obviously engineers that whenever we're not agreeing, we divert to an expert. So Philip's been great for that, the engineer.
Very opinionated engineer too. So.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is
I have
also
my
none of
devil's
us can
advocate
challenge
partner.
him. Well, none of us
Yeah.
have the engineering experience, so he's just a dictator, and we're all just trying to do democracy.
Bringing
Yeah,
Filipinos.
yeah. uh, that's funny.
Yeah. Anthony, that was a tough question. I thought just given the young blood here, they would be coming up with rock, paper, scissors, and that was the way to do it. So I'm
That could be smart.
too classist.
You gotta start flipping coins. I think that'll make our meetings go a lot faster.
Yeah, having worked with Daria, I can totally get your point that I mean Daria can push back pretty hard, right? So, but she does come up with great ideas, so you have that as well, right? I mean, that's the flip side.
Absolutely.
Um,
Double-sided
so one
coin.
of the yeah, there you go. So one thing I forgot to ask is, I mean, is there a regulatory approval that you guys need for all this, given that you're dealing with food? And I mean, I'm not sure about East Africa. I mean, I'm assuming at least where we live in our parts of the world, I mean, you had to obviously get that. I mean, that's something you have to work through and with all the governments as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Not the FDA approval, which we initially thought we needed, but apparently it's not a food product, even though it goes into food. So that was a learning for us. But just we need proof that it does pasteurize. So any certification. So we've been working with Intertech to get our global certification for that. And then just locally, just the standards boards. Are you using the right materials? Are they food safe? We always try to follow North American and Canadian standards because if we're meeting those standards, we're most likely meeting the ones in East Africa as well. But that's something we have to go through wherever we go.
Mhm.
And in Rwanda, you have Rika. I forget the one in Kenya. But yeah, Rika is like their standards board. You have to just go and get approval from them. And usually what they'll do is they'll just follow the standards that are like European or North American. So yeah, just been following that.
Was coming from the competition that UN kind of hosted helped with these processes, approvals, or it was always like, no, you had to start from zero to get these?
So after that competition, we really didn't hear. To be fair, it was like 10 organizations that were hosting the competition together. It wasn't just the UN. We name dropped the UN maybe more than we should. So it was a bunch of organizations, and we didn't really get support from the organizations themselves. But recently, I mean, last year we presented at the UN. We won a competition by the FAO as well, and now we're partnered with the UN. They're UNIDO, the Industrial Development Organization, and so they're just so connected. And so they're helping us do a pilot in Kenya in the next few months using their context connections there. And so I think, although we haven't been able to take advantage of that just yet, it'll be coming now, now that we've proved ourselves more than just an idea.
Awesome. Anything else that we've not asked you, you guys want to share about Safi?
Well, if we ever come to India, we'll let you know. We'll put the
Yeah, we
start.
can. Yeah, we can help you, but both of us are in California, so let us know if you're in California as well.
I guess biggest thing is like right now we're at a pretty critical point. So and by critical point, I mean like we're moving from like this prototyping, testing to wanting to industrialize and commercialize the device. So if there's anybody in the network that has any resources or is interested in the problem space, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be funding, Daria. that would be nice, but like any advice or funding, obviously, that would be super super helpful. I think like at this point in time, we need it most. So yeah,
We love to chat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, have an open mind and talk to as many people as possible. I mean, that's how you're going to make your connections and, go conquer the world. So,
absolutely.
yeah. So with that, thanks so much, guys. Glad you could come on Startups Dulce and share your story on behalf of Arudi and I. Wish you guys the very best, and we'll see you. I mean, we'll remember. I'll remember you at least every time I have a glass of milk, I guess, from here on. But all the very best to you guys.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for the opportunity to come on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening
Yeah.
to us.
Same here. Bye.